What is the most economically damaging insect in the U.S.? Depending on where you're at, that answer may change just slightly. But all in all, corn rootworm is the billion-dollar pest because it causes the most economic damage year on year and throughout the Midwest in a large geography. Bruce Battles, Technical Agronomy Manager today, and I'm standing in a field here in Slater, Iowa, looking at one of our research trials that looks at different management practices for managing corn rootworm. We have a lot of different treatments in this trial. It's a little early in the season, but we're starting to see quite a bit of damage starting to occur. We'll come back in a couple of weeks and do a final rating on these roots to evaluate performance of the individual hybrids and traits and insecticides and different management practices. But today we want to take a quick look and start to understand what we're seeing out in the field. So we're going to start by digging a few roots. We'll wash them and then take a closer look at what we're seeing out here in the field. So let's get started, let's dig. Part of the reason corn rootworm is such a damaging pest and most economically damaging is not only that it feeds on the roots, but it can cause a lot of other damage. It can prune the roots, obviously, which can lead to root lodging later, but higher adult beetle populations that may come after the larvae forms can also feed on silks, which can impact pollination and have a direct impact on that yield as well. Not only is those adults are going to mate and they're going to lay eggs into that field in the following year. So crop rotation becomes a huge aspect in managing corn rootworm due to their desire to mate and lay eggs back in that same field. Part of the problem is this pest has really adapted over the years to a lot of different management practices. We're now seeing what we call the northern extended diapause, so the northern species that actually lay eggs and they delay their hatch for an entire year and hatch in the following year afterwards. So this allows them, when a soybean crop is growing out there in that field, they stay dormant or in their diapause phase, and then when we rotate back to corn, they hatch and become a problem again. In other areas of the country, they've over-adapted in what we call the western variant. So it's actually the western species which is going into soybean fields neighboring to a cornfield after they emerge and they fed on roots. They're moving into the cornfields and laying their eggs in the actual neighboring soybean fields. Then those particular eggs will hatch the following year, and that leads to damage as well. So just a couple of examples how this pest has really evolved and managed to overcome rotations and different management practices like that. Not only from a management perspective has it overcome rotation, if you go back historically where we've used a lot of different insecticide approaches, especially beetle bomb approaches where we spray targeting the adult beetles before they lay their eggs in the year ahead of the crop that we're interested in, then that has been an effective practice in the past as well. However, there's been different types of insecticides that form resistance to those western and northern species. So there's a lot of evolution that's occurred this pest, and that's why it continues to be such a economically damaging pest going throughout the years. This is just one example of an untreated check where we hadn't have any management practices, no insecticide, no trait. And if you look really closely at it, you can see the pruning here of these upper nodes, and the following second node around is also pruned, all back really aggressively. So on an Iowa State 0 to 3 scale, which we haven't fully formed our roots here on this, but they would use an entire ring or node of rings would equivalent to 1 root score damage. So in this situation where we have 2 full nodes here that are gone, we at least have a 2, and we rated this just a little bit later in the season when damage is fully done and the plant's fully developed all of its other nodal roots. We'd probably maximize that scale on that 0 to 3 scale with 3 full nodes with this type of pressure. So we had really good pressure in our field we're looking at today, and it's going to be exciting to see some of the treatment differences later on in the fall, not only from yield, but as far as standability and the roots and how they are able to overcome that and protect those roots for standability. So here's a couple of examples that we dug from the field here today, and we have a lot of different treatments out in the field, but the ones we're focusing on here is our control. So this allows us to know what kind of pressure we had. Again, you can see the damage extending right here on a lot of the nodal roots that have really started to get trimmed back pretty aggressively in here on this. And this is the same hybrid with an Agronomy 5222 trait as a form of protection. So here you can see we've got really good nodal root formation. Really what stands out is the healthy, vibrant white, fleshy color. That's a good indicator that there's no scarring or feeding that might have occurred besides just the actual pruning of the roots. So from a management perspective, due to this pest and the way it's evolved over the years and overcome so many different management practices, we continue to do research like this trial that we're standing in today to look at new practices of managing the pest effectively. Part of the problem we had in the past is we've leaned too heavily on one technology or one approach to management, and that's where the systems broke down. That's where we started to see problems evolve. So no single management practice has ever been effective long term. It may be short term, but long term it's not typically going to hold up. So a couple of examples of things we're looking at in this trial that we already touched on was the doing nothing at all, obviously to compare everything against to see how effective we were, but traits. So Agronomy 5222 is looking good in this trial as one of the treatments, but we also have treatments in here that are insecticide only. Seed treatment, elevated increased rate of Cruiser 1250, and then we have combinations of all those different treatments as well. So a combination of trait plus insecticide, combination of trait plus seed applied insecticides, and a combination of all 3 of those together. Those are pieces of the puzzle, and as we think about management, we have to think about it in a multi-year perspective. So as we go forward, we need to think about what we did this year and think 1, 2, 3 years ahead as examples of what we have. So here is an example you can see on the screen of of a typical diagram of an approach that is a really sustainable approach in the long run once used effectively. So we can start with our first year following a soybean rotation. We come out of a soybean rotation, we get our second year of corn following corn, and then we're going to use, in probably that year, our pressure is going to be lower, so a trait alone is likely effective enough using the Agronomy 5222. You follow into a year following that, we need to be monitoring the pressure, especially looking at adult beetle pressure is a good indicator of how many beetles are out in the field the season before to indicate what kind of pressure I'm going to have in the following season. If I'm getting high numbers on my beetle catches, I probably need to look at using a soil applied insecticide, or even without beetle numbers rising, think about using soil applied insecticide, because I anticipate that second year in a row I'm going to have a lot more egg laying in that field and higher pressure. I move into the next year following that, I want to maybe consider rotating to a different trait. So Agronomy 3122 is one example of a different trait hybrid using different modes of action, which allows you to rotate from one season next in case there may be any resistance going on with that corn rootworms in that particular field. And then based on what I'm seeing after that following year, I want to consider using a foliar insecticide sprayed to reduce my beetle counts. If my population is getting really high, I may want to consider rotating directly back to soybeans. If my beetle counts are low enough, again, rotating traits and using insecticide in combination with it may get me a 4th year. but typically after that third and maybe fourth year, we need to think really long and hard about rotating back to soybeans to break that cycle and lower overall field populations. So stay tuned for more coming up this fall as we collect data on this field around the efficacy on root protection, and then following after that we'll have yield data coming back in. Plan on joining a meeting this winter, catching and signing up and attending so that you can learn more about these specific results. And keep in mind that this is just one location out of 8 different locations that we're looking at the same exact trial spread throughout the Midwest. So we anticipate really good learnings come from this to confirm we're doing the right and taking the right management practices for effectively long-term and sustainably managing corn rootworm. Again, this is Bruce Battles. If you like this video and you want to see more, like, share, and subscribe, please, to this channel.